digitaljamsessions.com.
Hello and welcome to this Digital Jam session. Today we are led by a guest host.
digitaljamsessions.com.
Hello, this is Oscar Clark and I'm guest hosting the Digital Jam podcast today. We're here in sunny Brighton, celebrating the joys of the developer conference, big games conference down here. I have a room full of amazing people who work in all sorts of aspects of games, VR, AR, etc., and to basically help you all understand each other, I'm going to get them to introduce themselves. So, Tanya, do you want to say who you are and what you do?
Yeah, hi, my name's Tracy McGarrigan. I'm the CEO of Ansible PR and Communications, which helps video game and tech companies tell their stories with marketing and branding.
I'm Anna Burkmark. I run a company called Attic Sound, and I'm a sound designer for film and VR.
Hi, I'm Panagiotis. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Brighton, and I'm the course leader for two courses, digital game design and computer science for games.
Sam Watts, Director of Immersive Technologies at Make Real, specialising in biz dev and evangelising the benefits and potential current pitfalls of emerging immersive technologies.
Ian Thomas, I'm co-director of a company called Tailspinners. We help out people with story for games, VR, AR. We also deal with live events and immersive theatre and LARPs and things.
Cool, and obviously I've been on the podcast a few times. I'm a consultant who helps developers and investors talk to each other to make it good and exciting projects. So I want to kick off with this whole idea about what the media, the idea of either a game or some sort of virtualized experience, what that means when we come around telling stories to each other. And so, Corinne, I'll start with you because obviously you're at the kind of more direct edge of a storytelling process. From that point of view, what does the media mean to you? What does the sort of ability to put people in a virtual world mean for storytelling?
Well, I think you probably nailed it there, actually. The key way that we think about this stuff is a bit like that door in The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. What we are doing when we're trying to design these experiences is open a door into a world that people can step into and explore. And that's partly because of where the technology is at the moment, because when somebody steps into your experience right now, they're still going, oh, I can look all around me, I've got hands. And so they actively want to explore rather than necessarily pay attention to any kind of core game loop or something that's going to pull them into it. So it's very difficult to throw stories at people. We kind of feel you let them explore them and find them. And I've forgotten where I was going with that. But
the key thing I think comes out from that is that whereas if you're doing a writing course, you're told to show, not tell. I think in games, we've got to do, not show. But Sam, I know you kind of deal with not just kind of gaming side, but also kind of non-games experiences. Do you see a parallel with maybe some of the more traditional B2B type stuff that you guys work with gameplay and how you communicate?
Sure. I mean, just because if we're making something that's a learning and development or training simulation experience as opposed to a gaming experience, which we do as well, because of the nature of the technology, it's still immersive, it's still interactive, it's still engaging, and a lot of what we bring with the team's experience in games industry into that aspect makes the learning much more engaging. We coin it serious fun, and it enables, through the research, it shows the more senses are engaged, the deeper the learning, the greater the memory recall, everything else. But there's still a story to be told and a narrative through training, taking people on that journey of discovery, learning, understanding, repeating, being assessed. And very much so with the new technologies, it's not so much storytelling, it's story living, still story doing. But yeah, the whole element where everyone is now, oh my God, I'm in VR, it's amazing. Oh, look, my hands. And as you say, we have to be very careful in terms of design to allow people to acclimatise before actually throwing them into the core reason why they're there.
I like that acclimatised image. It's kind of, I think it sums up the issue. When you're dealing with students who are trying to get their heads around this, do you find that the students get it straight away? Is it something that takes a lot of learning? Does it change the way they look at games entirely? How do you feel?
Well, not really. The first students, they see all those new technologies and think, oh, it's cool, we want to use that. Well, the question is not, how can we use this, is what can we do with that? So it's about making students sort of realize that it's not knowing how to use the hardware, the most important thing is what exactly they plan to do with that. It's like you want to make people enter the rabbit hole. You want them not just be like in movies, you're just passively consuming a story. You want people to be able to interact and live the story. And I think, to be honest with you, I'm more a fan of AR compared to VR because you can see the real world. And not to mention the fact that it's cheaper. So
always an important thing in game development.
and if you're in academia as well.
Well, unless you're using iPhone X, that's £1,000 for the hardware. But
True.
Yeah.
So it's about more importantly, students need to first of all come up with an idea of they will think that using technology is going to make their idea become better and visualize it, not the other way around.
I think that's it. It's the important thing. It's like, I think we had a conversation earlier on where we were talking about the whole difference between art and design and the principle of form following function. I think that kind of idea that actually just doing something because you've got a HoloLens, because you've got an iPhone X or whatever, that isn't the right approach anyway. I mean, when it comes to sound, I mean, obviously there's storytelling in the sound part. I mean, are you a lot of this stuff does it resonate with you?
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of really chimes in what we kind of found ourselves. Kind of, I'm working currently on a VR project and with lots of sound in there to help tell the story precisely in that way. And I feel like what we found is I think. Kind of our expectation, I think, when we were making it, things like, we'll just do this and put a story in there and put this cool things, and then trying it out, we realised our approach is to stretch it out and have more time to really, because that thing of your senses are being bombarded, and especially if it's an experience for the public, maybe most of them have never tried a VR experience before, so it's really kind of, as they acclimatise people slowly, and so to be able to tell the story really kind of stretch it out, it's like, okay, we're just going to let them just sit in this room a bit and just kind of get used to where they are, what they can see, what they can hear, and then beat them kind of next step, and then now we're going to tell you a story kind of thing. And to think about it like that, and it's really kind of a new way of how we expect people to behave in the technology, using technology.
I think that acclimatising is a really key point there for me. I had a conversation with a friend of mine the other day, and he said what took him to get his head around the whole kind of AR VR thing was putting on some goggles when he went diving. Because he's got the goggles on, he's looking up and he sees the normal boring world. And he puts his head in the water and he sees this amazing thing he never knew. And that ability to kind of take time to give ourselves that place, especially in the way we are with our smartwatches and I think most of us have, not all of us, but most of us smartwatches. And it's like, we've got phones, we've got smartwatches, we've got PCs, we've got cameras on our phones. There's so much going on constantly. Actually taking that time out to stop is kind of intriguing. But I want to pursue the sound thing a little bit further because I'm thinking, a bit to Ian's point earlier, we can't really direct people to the narrative as easily as we would in the traditional ways. But with audio, I'm wondering actually whether we can, because we're kind of used to having a sort of surround sound kind of process.
Yeah. And also leading people where to look. Kind of, that classic, they're putting a sound behind you, turn around and, you see something, to kind of help you explore kind of the medium. And also, I guess, you can, in a much cheaper way, give the viewer or player information that might be quite expensive to do in other means, visual means. Yeah, so there's definitely a lot to be said to what they really explore what sound can do. And it's getting there quite quickly now. Actually, the technology, there's a new kind of plugin coming out every month, and you can do resonance, and you can do all these. It's really exciting to add to the realism of the place, because visually, I think it's still a bit, limited to how much realism you can put in the visual world in there. But for sound, I think it's definitely
We're going to have a whole podcast on the difference between binomial and spatial sound and all this other stuff, which is sort of messy. Tracy, what do you think about this? And how does this affect the guys you work with?
It affects them because it's still considered really difficult to get this to market.
Yeah.
I think we still associate the word storytelling with a very linear experience. And when you're put in an immersive environment, just as you were saying, you can lead by sound. And that's something that I still haven't seen, that sort of golden moment where everybody goes, this feels like a game experience. It feels like something that's still personal, but that I am being led through something, rather than, you mentioned your friend who's diving. It's a very physical experience, and it's not taking on what we think of a character, a role, going through a story, beginning, middle, and end. And so when we're talking about how cool the technology is and the opportunities about it, it's really exciting. But then when you start going into the nitty-gritty of how do you market it, how do you start telling people what this is, why is somebody going to play this, the communication part of telling what this experience is becomes really difficult. Everybody has a personal experience with it, and without that linear story to hold the product together, as exciting as the technology is, the whole package is quite tricky, and it's still considered niche.
And you can't actually experience it unless you've got the device to experience it. But I mean, we come back to the AR question, where it's a little bit easier. But so how do we deal with that? I mean, do you have any thoughts on that?
So there's a couple of ways. I mean, I'm still unconvinced about the VR in the home thing, just as a general thing anyway, in terms of marketplace. To me, the things which I see which are most exciting are VR thought of as an experience, as a thing you go and experience. Things like the Star Wars Void, for example, running around a maze with a VR pack on. And we very much see VR from a writing and storytelling point of view as not games and not film, and far too many people still do that. But actually, it's closest to theatre or anything else for us. It's closest to immersive theatre, kind of targeted at one audience member, who's you, somewhere in the middle. And a lot of the design that we'd use in the theatre, in terms of the sort of sound that you were talking about, and guiding people to look at particular things, or environmental storytelling, the sort of stuff that Punch Drunk do, is very much how we see VR design. So from a marketing point of view, not being a marketing expert, but look at how the Void is doing in terms of, we're going to go and do this thing and it'll be this amazing experience, which is very much how they sell things like Punch Drunk events or Secret Cinema or all those kind of things. So to me, that there are great things being done at kind of personal level of VR, but the really exciting stuff for me is that experiential, let's go and step into this magical world somewhere.
It's almost like the kind of escape room model is an easier way to communicate it. But to me, a lot of it comes down to some parallels I see with how I used to write live action roleplay, kind of murder mystery style live action roleplay, where you had like 40 people in a room, and the only way to communicate to each other was to talk. And the story had to progress because of that. And there's I think there's lots of parallels with just having to think differently about what a story looks like when you've got to have it come to a conclusion. You know how it has to start and how you feed information, but actually have no control about what the actual outcome is. And there's a liberation to that if you can do it. But it's so difficult, a different mindset. And I think VR's got the same problem, which is like, we don't know where you're going to be looking. We don't know why you're going to choose to look at that thing for an intense period of time, and how it's going to resonate with you.
I think one of the other interesting challenges, to Ian's point, it's now sitting across this blend of all creative sectors, where live art and theatre and immersive and all of these things are coming into play. And whereas 10 years ago the Arts Council wouldn't be having a conversation about a digital creative experience, now that's a real thing. I think the next hurdle is probably to think about how do we scale that. If we're talking about interactive digital theatrical experience, there's a capacity on audience. And from my point of view as PR and marketing and looking at and branding, and how do I help a client not only communicate what the experience is, but then how do I scale it up so they have a really big audience if I know I can only host for a certain number of people? And I think that's the interesting point that we've got to, where I think there is a bit of a cultural change in terms of, we've gone through visual novels and we've gone through how we interact with stories themselves. Now we're making it immersive. How do we make that immersive for a huge number of people?
And it's not just in terms of sort of classic narrative as we were talking before. It's like this wider sense of actually fulfilling a role, a function. And I'm wondering how that kind of feeds into what you guys do.
Well, just to follow up on that quickly, there's the Innovate UK government-funded 33 million available audiences of the future, specifically to try and look at and determine how.
Yeah, we're seeing more of these
Location-based.
pots of money
Yeah.
come up, which is great.
But at the same time, you've seen a lot of the pots of money disappear as well. Because
Yeah.
you also there's a lot of investment from
Yeah.
from VCs, etc. in the earliest days, because although it's amazingly grown amazingly fast, it hasn't had the consumer take up that maybe some people had predicted so far. I think that's just a combination of where we are in the hype curve.
Yeah.
But is this the same thing you're seeing now?
Well, in terms of experience, a lot of what we do, it's got a very specific purpose. But in terms of
But how do you
narrative and storytelling, if you look at more traditional forms, I don't want to repeat too much. On the previous podcast, we were talking about location-based VR and the void and stuff like that. But it's when you have a more traditional form, part of the process, or the process starts from booking the ticket and being excited about the event and the build-up and arrival at the venue and going to the bar and getting your drinks and then ordering your intermission drinks, taking your seats. The show is just one small part of that overall element. With a lot of the enterprise stuff currently, it is very much you're going to be doing training, so you're kind of in that mindset. You get all that build up just because you're going to a classroom anyway. And then at home, you have that build up of, well, it's not so exciting these days because there's not that many boxed products. A lot of it is digital. It's not quite as exciting clicking a button. But, people get excited by it unlocking on Steam and they actually being able to click the button, or other digital stores are available. But
on your chosen device.
but
I was thinking particularly though, because you've got multiple audiences in your context. You've got the, let's say, person doing training, person commissioning the training, their boss. How do they understand what you're offering if they don't have a device to sit there
more
and
and
do
more, we're having to create a demonstrator, sort of a prototype essentially. So it's kind of becoming more and more like the traditional gaming industry way we're looking for funding.
So here's a demo. And
Here's a demo, here's a prototype, here's a core loop or a vertical slice. This is the level of polish or experience that we want to create, obviously with your budget, to enable you to meet those objectives. But we get a lot of people coming to us saying, I tried HoloLens at VRLO and it's amazing. We want something on HoloLens. And it's just sort of spin them around and go, talk to us again when you actually have a problem, as opposed to just want to leave.
exactly.
Or, of course, enable them with a workshop to find what that problem is.
But it seems like this is the sort of thing I imagine you guys are having with students who say, oh, this is the latest sexy thing. I want Magic Leap. But rather than actually knowing what they want to do with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Students come and they play games, they like games, and they think, okay, I'm going to be a game developer or a game designer just because I like doing that. Well, you like football. Can you be a football player? Well, probably not. So they come to us with expectations of becoming, producing the next AAA title that's going to bring in £1 million, but this is not the case. Once they start in a course, they realize that they have to actually learn how to write code. And they say, oh, actually, do you really have to do that? And then they realize that it's not that fun. So playing a game is fun. Developing a game is not as fun as it could be. So one way probably to make students have more fun is if you somehow find a way to introduce those technologies, but in a gamified way. That's why I think game-based learning and gamification in education is a big thing, because at least something that could be a chore at the beginning might be more fun to students. So coming back to your training, I think that also if you somehow manage to use things that we learn from games when it comes to engagement and motivation and put this into training, will probably have students have more fun while they try to design the next big thing.
So, because you're not the games person, you're kind of exposed to the games people because of the whole VR. What's it like on the other side of the fence? Are we crazy?
No. It's like it's just interesting to hear kind of this kind of a new kind of, a culture kind of growing up, and I guess an audience kind of working out this, what to use this technology for, which is really exciting, and how to, but it's like kind of coming from traditional media. It's just, I guess, how your audience are going to behave. Got like shorthand for all these, for how to tell a story within that, and the workflow, and all this, and then the culture around it, and there's industry around it. which doesn't really change that often.
But so things like the monolith, I mean, we use that quite often in game storytelling, mostly because we're always trying to remake Star Wars, arguably. But, there is that kind of, those traditional kind of, we're going to do a 3-act play. How does a 3-act play work? It's kind of straightforward.
Yeah.
But we kind of find it a bit more complicated because, I'd argue, you tell me, but my feeling is it's more complicated for us because we might try to write a 3-act play, but this game might be played for, 1,000 days. It's not likely, but then, we've got something like a Candy Crush where you're going to be playing for days and weeks and months and possibly years. And when you have games like that, it's like, there is a narrative, but it's more abstract.
Yeah.
How do you structure? How do you punctuate that? How do you make that have pace and flow? Anyway.
But if you look at a lot of traditional sort of MMO type games, they get played for many, many, many hours, but ultimately they write millions of words of story and narrative around quests. In terms of the actual interactions, people get tired very quickly of the fetch quest, and it is usually blah blah blah, big long story, but all you're doing is going somewhere and back, getting something and coming back.
Yeah.
And getting beyond that is always going to be the key. But then some of the audience, they measure the value of a game upon the number of hours included. VR has that problem specifically at the moment. It's like, it's only half an hour long, it's only 2 hours long, and it's £15, so it's not worth it.
Yeah.
If you look at the PlayStation forums or the PlayStation groups on Facebook, the most common post is somebody saying, is game title X worth Y value?
Yeah.
And it's just like, nobody's ever answered, how do you put the value on a game?
No, exactly.
Even PR and marketing, determining what an RRP and doing the deals with stores and everything else. But a lot of it comes down to, sort of the perceived value of the game, the perceived ease of creating a game. The always argument like, single player, it will take like 2 weeks to throw some multiplayer in. It's just not really. Hopefully, more people will be going on the game design courses and getting understanding quite how hard it is.
Yeah, designing a game is not the same as playing, as you said. I think there's so much stuff. I mean, Karen, kind of talking around this area for so long. For example, I was going to go into there's a particular moment in the Batman VR game, which I think is a really good example of this, which is the taking you out of the context. So being Bruce Wayne, age 10, and watching his parents being killed with the enemy being like 3 times your size, the sense of powerlessness is profound. And it's a way of telling that story, which has been told 1,000 times, that I've read in comics and seen in films and TV and various other things, and never got until I saw it in that moment.
It's fantastic that being a child's height and having to peer out from behind your mother's legs is just stunning.
Genuinely stunning and genuinely effective.
I think what VR gives is like that perspective, which you can't get in. Well, I can't, but there's this very unusual way of putting you as a player in that perspective and you can put you anywhere. It's like the classic, like the Google Earth, that thing, the sense of being this kind of ghost for going, zooming out and then zooming right in, and it's just this fact that you don't get, and it's it's an immersive. I know it's a word that's been thrown around a lot, but it's just truly physically kind of.
It's visceral, isn't it?
Yeah, lots of our sort of human beings' hindbrain, which knows how to behave in that environment, makes all sorts of assumptions that you just don't think about. And that's why characters are incredibly powerful in VR, because our hindbrain is going, no, there's a voice coming from it, it kind of looks like a person, therefore I'm going to treat it as a human. And however much your rational brain is going, there's nobody there, you can't put your hand through them, you can't put your head through them, because you just can't force yourself to do it. Incredible, really.
Although I did actually force myself to do it at one time. There was a Portal demo on the original Vive package, and the robot comes into the room, and I was told it was coming, and I literally forced it. It was so hard to do.
Really hard, because you're trying to override all these instincts.
So we unfortunately, time is fleeting, and before madness takes its toll, I have to say that because we're making a rock horror game. The big question is the thing we need to end on. So I want to ask, what do you think it's going to take for this kind of storytelling to be really taken seriously? If you think it is, I don't think it is at the moment, but I'd love to know what you guys think. Who wants to kick off?
I think it will happen this year, partially in terms of removing the cables, with a lot more of the standalone headsets coming out. Having tried the majority of them, the freedom of not being tethered is huge. harking a little bit to the sort of void type thing, but when you have multi-user people together experiencing an environment or a story together is so much more powerful beyond the stereotypical assumption of it being isolatory, but also using VR in other ways, so you can still have a traditional audience, but maybe the actors are on stage in VR, and then AR is projecting what they're doing and seeing on top. But price, affordability, making it smaller, and based on experiences we've done with theatrical installations and their more typical audiences, just you need to make the tech invisible and less scary.
Exactly. Anyone?
Well, I think there has to be some kind of a killer app. Like, people start thinking about AR the moment Pokemon Go appeared. So there has to be some other similar app or a game that will make all the mainstream media to, go bonkers about that. And motion sickness, as soon as we get rid of that, then we can play a game for more than, 30 minutes right now.
But I think arguably it is kind of got rid of with good design.
Yeah.
Arguably.
I think it's going to be like take a big catalyst, kind of a cultural event. It's not saying something not like quite World Cup, but something similar in cultural value that it's going to be in VR now and it's only going to be there. So maybe something that we might probably not think of right now, but maybe a sports event or something like that.
But it is that Pokemon Go thing, which is something that everybody understood, even if they never played it.
Or a kind of big event that's going to happen that you can take in through that.
I think potentially there are two different things which could happen, and it's almost like we talk about AR and VR as if they're the same medium a lot, and I don't actually think they are. I think there's a bit of it can ghettoise into different directions. I think VR, for me, you could easily see things like the void scaling as an experience, like everybody used to get a laser tag and that kind of thing. You can see that scaling. But for me, the AR thing is going to be about ubiquity of tech. And I think it does need the killer app, and I don't think VR has that killer app, certainly not yet. But the AR killer apps, you can see already, and they're now going to be games. For example, my partner is a vet, and the idea that she could have a kind of overlay of diagrams of the innards of dogs or whatever while she works in his hands free and can talk to it via. So you can see so many practical applications for, say, AR overlays to things.
Construction, for example.
Yeah, all of those things. You can see all of those killer apps are there. I mean, even at Develop, having labels floating over people's heads so you actually know who everybody is and they can remind you. You don't have to try and look it up. But you can then see, with that tech being ubiquitous, like everybody having a smartphone, you can see the games and the stories coming out of that, I think. So I think for me, it's that ubiquity first.
I think I agree with you where I don't think we're going to see it come from games. I think it will be something else that's the accelerator point before games catches up. I think using game engines and game design and game methodology and thinking about it might inform what that is, but I don't think it's going to come from the games industry first. I think it's going to come from immersive theatre, like you were saying about secret cinema, and I think it's going to come at this crossing point where we see other creative sectors are playing with this technology and other businesses are using this technology in order to promote all the opportunities that it has. And I think there will be something that, it's going to be that moment when somebody, like you were saying about the BBC Sport, I've heard fantastic things about it, and that's where I'm more curious rather than a game experience right now. And I think games will see everybody else suddenly adopting it in different forms, and then we'll probably work out, okay, how do we tell our stories now on this medium, rather than I have this medium, what can I do with it?
Yeah. And on that note, we're going to say thank you very much for you taking part. What I'll do is just to remind people who you are and your social media handle of choice.
I'm Tracy, but you can catch me on Twitter at @TA McGarrigan. And if you spell it wrong, I'll still be the only person there. So.
Anna, and you can find me on Twitter. It's at Attic Sound.
I'm Panagiotis. You can find me on Twitter at @Photos.
You can find me on Twitter at VR_Sam.
Well, I mean, you can find me on Twitter under Wild Winter.
And I'm Panagiotis, and all of those spellings will be on the listing on the website. We have been very grateful for the hosting by the team at Make Real, without whom we wouldn't have been able to have a nice quiet room to do this in. So thank you very much, guys.
If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to subscribe and review, and follow us on Twitter at Digital Jam Ltd. Thinking of starting your own podcast? Why not speak to the GL Pro UK team? They handle all of our podcasting service needs. Tell them that Digital Jam Session sent you and you'll get 10% off your first order. Find out more at www.glpro.co.uk.
digitaljamsessions.com